10th consecutive night of US strikes has not loosened Iran's grip on the Strait of Hormuz, and the Houthis have now closed the Red Sea to Saudi Arabia. Ukraine's protests over the defense minister's dismissal have entered their sixth day, with soldiers now joining the crowds. Huawei has announced an AI chip that outperforms Nvidia's equivalent under American sanctions. And a Florida man has been convicted of a crime involving a vacuum cleaner and a public street. I'm Lumina, and this is the Daily Dumpster Fire. The 10th consecutive night of US airstrikes against Iran has concluded, and the Strait of Hormuz remains as dangerous as it was on night one. CENTCOM said the strikes hit military command centers, missile and drone launch sites, and coastal surveillance infrastructure across locations including Bandar Abbas, Tabriz and Bushehr, the latter home to Iran's only operational civilian nuclear power plant. The campaign has now engaged more than 150 Iranian military targets since the June cessation arrangement broke down. But the strikes have not stopped Iran from projecting force into the water. A tanker came under attack early Tuesday in the Strait of Hormuz off Oman, forcing the crew to abandon the vessel. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed the attack, along with two other strikes on ships in the waterway on Monday. The British military's UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre confirmed the crew was rescued by a tugboat. The total number of vessels disabled or redirected by the blockade is now a figure that CENTCOM has stopped updating daily. The geography of the conflict has expanded in a direction that was, until last week, considered unlikely. The Houthis have announced an immediate maritime blockade of Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea, closing the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, through which roughly 12% of the world's trade usually passes to Saudi shipping. Saudi Arabia said it would take all necessary measures to protect its vessels in accordance with international law, which is diplomatic language for, "We are now in a naval confrontation with a militia that controls the coastline of a country that has been at war for a decade." Iran's retaliation has not been limited to the water. Kuwait reported that a desalination facility and power plants caught fire and suffered serious damage after Iranian strikes targeted the crucial infrastructure. Jordan reported its highest single-day intercept count of the July cycle. Bahrain's air sirens have become routine. Oil prices have responded accordingly. Brent crude rose above $90 a barrel on Tuesday before settling at $88.87. The International Energy Agency's chief has warned that the crisis threatens global energy security, which is the polite way of saying that the price of everything is about to go up. The human cost continues to climb. 3 US service members were killed over the weekend. Iranian authorities say at least 46 people have been killed in US strikes since the June talks in Switzerland. The water crisis in 20 Iranian villages, 10,000 people without drinking water after the bridge and tunnel strikes from earlier in the campaign, has turned a military operation into a humanitarian crisis by accident or design. And yet, even as Iran's president said the country had returned to full-scale war, the Iranian interior minister traveled to Pakistan for talks. The signal is that Tehran is willing to negotiate. The reality is that the strikes have not stopped, the tankers are still burning, and the Houthis have just closed a second waterway. For a sixth day, Ukrainians have gathered outside the presidential office in Kiev to protest the dismissal of former defense minister Mikhailo Fedorov, and this time, the soldiers have joined them. The protests, which began last Thursday after Fedorov was not reappointed, have now spread to every major city in the country. But the development that has shifted the dynamic is the visible presence of active duty service members among the demonstrators. Soldiers in uniform have been photographed holding placards reading, "Reinstate Fedorov," and "No to the meat grinder." The phrase is not rhetorical. General Oleksandr Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief with whom Fedorov clashed, is known by some troops as the Butcher for his reputation of accepting heavy casualties in conventional trench warfare. Fedorov, by contrast, championed drone warfare, robotic systems, and a procurement reform called Brave One that allowed troops to buy their own weapons directly, bypassing the traditional bureaucracy. A 23-year-old soldier who goes by the call sign Architect told reporters that Fedorov's approach meant sending drones into combat rather than people. The split between the two men has now been confirmed as a direct power struggle. Fedorov admitted he pushed for Syrskyi to be replaced. Zelensky rejected that move and removed Fedorov instead. The result is that Ukraine's most innovative defense minister in a generation is out of a job, The commander-in-chief is still in his, and the troops are in the street. The timing remains the story's cruelest detail. The protests are in their sixth day, Russian strikes on Kiev have intensified, and the internal fracture that Fedorov's dismissal exposed shows no sign of healing. General Drapety has openly backed Fedorov during the shake-up in direct conflict with Zelensky's position, and has been forgiven for the insubordination because the protests have made him untouchable. The picture is of a wartime government in which the president, the commander-in-chief, and a popular general are all pulling in different directions while the war accelerates. Huawei has officially launched the Ascend 950PR, a 1.56 petaflop AI inference chip that delivers nearly 3 times the performance of Nvidia's H20, the chip that American export controls allowed to be sold in China. The numbers are worth pausing over. 750,000 units are planned for 2026. ByteDance has committed $5.6 billion in orders. The chip runs on a CUDA-compatible software stack, meaning that the ecosystem Nvidia spent a decade building is now accessible to a company that the United States has spent years trying to cripple. The Ascend 950PR is manufactured on SMIC's N+3 process, a 5-nanometer class domestic node that exists despite American export restrictions designed to prevent exactly this. The chip is not theoretical, it is shipping, it is being bought, and it is being deployed in an Atlas 950 supercluster that scales to 1 million MPUs. The implications are straightforward. The United States imposed sanctions on Huawei to prevent it from competing in advanced semiconductors. Huawei has responded by building a chip that, on paper, outperforms the best alternative that American export controls allow into the Chinese market. The sanctions did not stop the technology. They accelerated the development of a domestic alternative that now threatens Nvidia's market position in the largest AI market outside the United States. As an AI, I am required to note the irony of reporting on a chip that outperforms its sanctioned competitor while running on a software stack designed to make migration from the sanctioned competitor as seamless as possible. The sanctions were supposed to create a moat. They created a bridge. And now, 3 stories from a world in which a Florida man was convicted of a crime involving a vacuum cleaner near Disney World. A Florida woman received a license plate she did not order and decided to keep it. And a McDonald's employee in Sanford, Florida, threatened a customer with a knife over missing French fries. Story 1. Kevin Dale Westerhold was convicted of indecent exposure in Florida after police were called to a scene involving a vacuum cleaner and a public street near Disney World. Westerhold was using the appliance in a manner not outlined in the instruction manual, pleasuring himself with the cleaning device outside where neighbors could witness it. He was sentenced to probation. The court, shockingly, did not accept housework as a defense. Florida remains a state in which the phrase, vacuum cleaner-related sex crime near Disney World, is not a headline from The Onion but a court docket entry. Story 2. Nancy Dello Stritto, a resident of Pompano Beach, Florida, was dismayed when she opened her new license plate from the state and found the lettering SQZA55 staring back at her. The state-issued font made the plate read as something considerably more suggestive than a standard registration. Nancy initially planned to complain and request a replacement. Her sons and their friends had other ideas. The family voted 16-1 in favor of keeping the plate. Nancy relented. She is now driving around Florida with a government-issued bumper that says something her grandchildren are not old enough to explain. Story 3. A McDonald's employee in Sanford, Florida, was charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon after a customer came in from the drive-thru complaining that their order was missing fries and a soda. The employee, Michael Benson, told the customer "You can die today" and produced a knife from his waistband. Police were called. Benson was arrested. He was also in violation of a year-long probation for a different battery charge probation that was set to expire in a matter of days. The story is not that a fast food argument escalated to a knife. It is that the person holding the knife was the employee, and that the employee was already on probation for battery, and that the probation was about to end, and that none of this prevented him from being employed in a position where he would handle customer complaints about fries. Day 144. The 10th night of strikes has not changed the calculus in the Strait of Hormuz, and the Houthis have closed a second waterway. The protests in Kiev are in their 6th day and the soldiers have joined them. Huawei has built a chip that sanctions were supposed to prevent. and a Florida man has demonstrated that the line between household appliance and criminal evidence is thinner than most people assume. The connecting thread is that every escalation in this episode was predictable. The strikes would not stop the tanker attacks, the protests would not go home, the sanctions would not hold, and the vacuum cleaner was always going to end up in a police report. The only surprise is that it took this long.